Let me set the scene. It's Thanksgiving night of this year. All the eating is done, everything is packed away, and I am sitting on my bed, crying, full-on ugly crying, the kind that's so loud that your dad texts you from downstairs and politely reminds you that some people in this house are trying to sleep, thank you very much. My sister is sitting next to me, more surprised than anything else at the fact that I'm the one sobbing, I think. We're both staring at my laptop, propped open on a music stand, playing the final moments of what is easily one of my favorite shows, The Legend of Korra. Cut to an hour later, and I'm alone in my room, and I'm feeling hollow. I try putting on some music. No help. I try watching a movie, one of my favorites, Lady Bird. Nothing. I even try to go to sleep, and I can't. So, like any depressed nihilist living at home during the outset of their 20s, feeling cooped up and stuck, I open up Google Docs, and I scroll down to some of the oldest writings that I have, projects and journal entries from my junior year of high school, when one of the best teachers I've ever been privileged to have pushed me headfirst into a world of creativity that led me to the point that I found myself in at that moment. I remember how good it felt to really get into the writing groove for the first time, to feel like I was effortlessly doing something excellently, not just for academia but for some greater purpose, if that makes sense. I remember discovering the concept of the video essay, people talking on the internet about the things they loved, and I remember trying to write some of my own. None of them quite clicked. I think I know why now. I remember the first anime I ever watched, Attack on Titan, when I was 16. I remember falling in love with it and how it opened up my eyes to what animation could be. I remember after that, falling in love with the medium as a whole and voraciously watching as many shows as I possibly could. Cowboy Bebop, Gurren Lagann, JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, Ghost Stories, and so many others. All through high school and my first year of college, I fell headfirst into anime culture and loving it. I thought that I had finally found my people. But then, this past summer, Netflix got the rights to two shows that I had never seen before but had always meant to. Avatar, The Last Airbender, and The Legend of Korra. Two shows that I started watching out of obligation to the people who had been telling me for years now that I needed to, but that quickly became two of the best things that I've ever watched. Two shows that taught me more about myself in a series of months than I think I've ever learned in any other point in my life, and I'm getting ahead of myself, aren't I? We'll get there. Tonight, I'm talking about the latter of those two shows, one that I think is critically underappreciated, one that became a vital part of my life in the past year, and the things that we can learn from it, or at least the things that I did. We got a lot of ground to cover, so without further ado, let's jump in. My name is Evan, and this is The Legend of Korra, a lesson in looking inward.
The best girl don't always win. Sometimes they lose for the better. The best girl don't always win. Now sometimes you try to keep things together, and then you lose for the better. Best girl, they don't always win. I see the best girl, the best girl always wins.
We can't talk about Korra without first talking about her predecessor. We start in 1995 at the Rhode Island School of Design, where two students, Brian Konetsko and Michael Dante DiMartino, meet each other and form a friendship that would forever change Western animation, bonding over a shared love of the works of Hayao Miyazaki, Studio Gainax, martial arts movies, and Eastern philosophies. Over the course of 6 years, the two would build their creds by working on shows like King of the Hill and Family Guy. Their biggest achievement, however, would spark to life in early 2001, when Konetsko drew a simple sketch of a bald kid with an arrow on his head, shepherding a herd of bison through the sky. He showed this sketch to DiMartino, who at the time was watching a documentary about explorers trapped in the South Pole, and together they worked out a story for the character. We thought, there's an air guy along with these water people trapped in a snowy wasteland, and maybe some fire people are pressing down on them. From there, they fleshed out and added to their world, implementing a magic system that deliberately differed from, in Konetsko's words, the typical wand-wielding, spell-casting fair. A skill rather than just a power, something that a practitioner had to learn and strive for. To add authenticity and believability to this system, the pair sought out the consultation of Konetsko's martial arts instructor, Sifu Kisu, who helped them design the bending styles after real-world martial arts. Waterbending is Tai Chi, earthbending is Hungar, firebending is Northern Shaolin Kung Fu, and airbending is Bajua Zhang. In building their world, they eventually had to retool and reshape parts of their initial concept. Originally, Aang would have been in stasis in the iceberg for 1,000 years, and would have woken up in a futuristic setting, with Momo in this version being a robotic monkey. However, Konetsko and DiMartino didn't want to overcomplicate their setting, so they stripped the futuristic parts away. Even then, they still weren't done editing. In one draft, Appa would have been one of a herd of a dozen sky bison, in the next, one of 3 remaining ones, and finally, the last remaining one. With their setting and concept nailed down, the boys pitched their series to Nickelodeon, and the rest is history. They created Avatar, The Last Airbender, and honestly, I don't think I need to tell you how good it is. But you know I'm going to anyway, because first off, God is an utter masterpiece, and secondly, it serves as a good baseline for the modernizing world as we know it in The Legend of Korra. The show focuses on Aang, a 12-year-old boy who emerges from stasis in an iceberg during the final year of the 100-Year War, a century-long conflict between the imperialistic Fire Nation and the defensive Earth Kingdom, with the northern and southern water tribes being more or less stranded in the crosshairs of the fight. Aang is a remnant of a different time. He first ended up in the iceberg after fleeing the Fire Nation's attack on his people, the Air Nomads, an attack that literally wiped all of them out. Aang is not only the last remaining airbender, he is also the current incarnation of the Avatar, a reincarnating being who alone possesses the ability to control or bend all 4 of the elements, and is the only one powerful enough to defeat the Fire Lord and bring an end to the conflict. The Last Airbender is a monumentally important show for a couple of reasons, but the primary one is the way that it talks to its audience without talking down to its audience. The show deals with very heavy issues, like how cycles of hatred and revenge only bring more hatred and revenge, cycles of abuse, how they shape the mindset and the outlook of the abused, and how only love can heal them, the idea that redemption is always a possibility for those that truly seek it out of a desire to better themselves, the toll that killing another human being would place onto a person, and the inner strength necessary to find a better solution in the face of that toll. The show is downright fucking prescient at times, too. Its setting of a seemingly endless war, one that many of its combatants don't even seem invested in fighting anymore but continue on regardless, perpetuated by a nation that only seeks to expand and flaunt its military power, was a powerful statement when the show first aired in 2005, and one that has only continued to age like a fine wine with every passing year. I'm sure that to the people watching it when it first came out, the idea that a war like that could last for a century was absolutely outlandish, but looking at the same, still ongoing war 15 years later, it's chilling. But for as dark and mature as I'm making it seem, the show does have plenty of brevity. Inspired by the anime that they loved, Konietzko and DiMartino were able to take this serious war story and make it accessible to anyone by infusing it with moments of comedy that somehow don't seem out of place, even though the backdrop they're in is an utterly serious one. Giancarlo Volpe, one of the animation directors for the show, has since said that Konietzko and DiMartino instructed the animation team to buy and watch the entirety of Fooly Cooly from Studio Gainax, whose work that they were fans of, and watching Fooly Cooly shows the connective tissue that the creative imbued the show with. To briefly touch on a topic that's been talked about to death and back, there's been this ongoing discussion for years now about whether The Last Airbender and The Legend of Korra qualify as anime or not. On a literal level, they absolutely do. Anime is a slang term meaning animation, but that's not really what this question is asking. The real issue here is whether these shows deserve to be discussed in the same way us nerds talk about our precious anime. I think that they absolutely do. In their efforts to make a show influenced by anime, the two struck a balance that really makes anime worth watching, a mix of lightness and seriousness that can be enjoyed by anybody. For every moment that one of my favorite shows, Full Metal Alchemist, devote to having someone discuss in graphic detail the horrors that they were made to commit as a soldier fighting in a bloody civil war, there's a moment of a high-ranking military official wishing he could change the official military uniform to tiny miniskirts. So, too, does this pattern follow into these two shows. The world of Avatar is, at its core, a fun one, and for every war-torn city the characters pass through, there's that poor, unfortunate cabbage merchant who's always getting screwed over. Good anime is accessible to everybody because it talks to everyone without talking down to anyone, and The Last Airbender and The Legend of Korra do the same. It doesn't matter what country the studios that drew these shows was based out of. They managed to capture the essence, the vibe of the modern artistic movement that we recognize as anime. In another example of parody with anime, Konietzko and DiMartino didn't want their show to be a cash cow, pumping out season after season in order to create a marketable brand. They had pitched Nickelodeon one continuous story with a definitive beginning, middle, and end, and in the beginning of a trend that we'll see become more relevant later, they stuck to their guns over the wills of the studio. Starting with Book 3, Chapter 12, The Western Air Temple, Avatar, The Last Airbender returned from a nearly 8-month hiatus on July 14th, 2008, and aired a new episode every night that week, concluding with the 4-part finale, Sozin's Comet, on Saturday, July 19th, 2008. Aang, now a fully realized Avatar, defeated the tyrannical Fire Lord Ozai, ended the 100-Year War, and returned peace and harmony to the world. The series would be continued somewhat, with a few comics telling the story of the reconstructive efforts by the 3 remaining nations after the war, and they're good, read them if you haven't, but by and large, the story of The Last Airbender, Avatar Aang, had been told to completion. But like the cycle of the seasons, the cycle of the Avatar would soon begin anew. At San Diego Comic-Con in 2010, Konietzko and DiMartino would reveal that they had begun production on a new project, a sequel to The Last Airbender called Avatar: Legend of Korra, and a year later at SDCC 2011, they had a trailer to show. We open on a shot of a snowy night, then a tower on an island, and finally something familiar, a sky bison swooping down. Next, we see a small sailboat sitting to the right of a massive statue of a bald man standing in a bay. Behind them is a glowing city skyline of towering buildings, not the huts, temples, and houses we knew from before, the first hints at how this world has changed since the last time we saw it. We fade again, this time to a low-angle shot of the statue, and it is unmistakably recognizable, an adult Avatar Aang, immortalized in stone, standing resplendent in robes and proudly holding a staff adorned with airbender symbols. The melancholic music swells as, for the first time, we hear something we recognize, the secondary part of the Avatar's theme, played over a scene of a girl in winter clothing turning away from an igloo and heading out into the darkness. From the contrast of these two shots, one the stone-faced statue of Aang and the other a turn-away shot of this girl, it is immediately apparent to us who she is, our yet unnamed Avatar, turning away from the safety of her home towards the promise of her destiny. We see her in warmer weather clothes, staring out at the bright skyline we saw earlier, and with the view of the city, we can tell she is on the island with the statue, literally sitting in the shadow of Aang. We cut to a liminal space, where we see the girl bending water with ease as a new instrument comes in, a flute. As she throws it directly at the camera, we suddenly cut to a shot of her riding a polar bear dog in the middle of total modernization, a panning shot of a glowing, expansive city with a massive bridge, skyscrapers, and airships flying overhead. The world as we knew it previously has moved on into the mechanized future, and against it all, this new Avatar seems tiny and small, only taking up a speck of a massive panning shot of the city, and nowhere at all to be found in the next ones. First an overhead view of a clean park, then a crowd of people outside of a massive building with an ornate dome on the roof, then a wide stadium illuminated by spotlights over an elevated pool of water. As the music drifts through these scenes like the sound of the wind, the message is clear. The modernizing world is moving past the need for the Avatar. She is small against the backdrop of the future, and it does not need her to maintain this peace. We see the Avatar, hands folded in front of her, as the look of sadness on her face transforms into one of determination. The nostalgic strings and flute fade, and in a rush of power are replaced by the Avatar's theme, underscored by fast-paced rhythmic percussion like the thrum of machinery at work. The Avatar jumps through a swirl of fire to grab the man who bent it by the wrist, and suddenly the trailer is a series of frenetic, violent action, all underscored by music we know, arranged with percussion in a way we've never heard before. The Avatar in hand-to-hand combat with a person in a mask, partially obscured by another person flipping into the shot, a man being thrown through a window, someone in armor jumping around the stadium from earlier to avoid balls of fire being hurled at them. The Avatar, clad in red, straight up shouldering a blast of fire and running out of frame. A man jumping off a rooftop with a coil of metal cable strapped to his back, looking like something straight out of Attack on Titan, shooting one cable at a building to swing like Spider-Man and the other out to restrain the Avatar. A man being violently thrown off of the stadium into the water below, and finally, a shot of a man in a mask, facing away from us, before half-turning at the last minute before our title card drops, and the message is clear. Even this pristine, beautiful city of the future needs an Avatar in it, that living symbol of nature, to survive. Bending has never looked this good, and the reason why isn't just a standard shonen, you gotta constantly raise the stakes thing either. Konietzko and DiMartino went into The Legend of Korra with the goal in mind to tell a story about a modernizing world, and that theme is baked into the very world the story takes place in through the magic system that defines it. By the time Avatar Korra comes around, the girl from earlier is Avatar Korra, by the way, bending techniques have evolved, modernizing with the times into a melting pot of styles. The show introduces pro bending, a sport that's sort of a cross between MMA tournaments, dodgeball, American football, sumo, and paintball, if that makes sense. It's incredibly complex. The Avatar Wiki has an entire page dedicated to the rules of the sport. Konietzko and DiMartino brought on MMA fighters like Jeffrey Humphreys and Mac Danzig to give inspiration for the more fast-paced, violent styles used in the pro bending matches, and parkour specialists like Steve Harada and Jake Huang to demonstrate various forms of parkour, free-running, and tricking. And you can see how this would affect bending as an art style, right? Take earthbending, for instance. In The Last Airbender, the element was all about standing firm, being a rock in the stream of life. However, in a pro bending match, that kind of slow, methodical approach to bending is going to get you knocked into the drink every time. So to compensate, new techniques have been invented that almost take a note from classical airbending, ironically, placing emphasis on being light on your feet and only standing solidly on the ground for as long as you need to bend more earth before jumping somewhere else. Bending as an art form has evolved, changed, and modernized in the 70 years between the two shows. Where it was strictly a discipline of combat in the time of Avatar Aang, it's a show of spectacle by the time of Avatar Korra, less of a dance and more of a clash of fighters. Because The Legend of Korra aired after the golden age that was mid to late 2000s shonen anime, it could take inspiration and influence from it, and as a result, bending in the show looks like something out of Full Metal Alchemist Brotherhood or Bleach or Naruto. The evolution of bending in the 70 years since we last saw this world is, in my eyes, emblematic of the ways that world has changed, too. While we were away, technology and industry has had the chance to take root and grow, thanks in large part to the spread of Fire Nation technology to the rest of the world. Swords into plowshares, you know? Once the 100-Year War had finished, their technology disseminated to the rest of the world, so now wherever you go, you'll find trains, planes, and automobiles, not to mention airships, radios, and a whole host of what in our world was early 20th century technology. I think that the world of Korra is an incredibly interesting one, for a couple of reasons. Firstly, in a sense, it's a manifestation of Konietzko and DiMartino doubling back on themselves and creating the version of the Avatar world as they had first conceived it. Although there are no robotic monkeys or computers, the world of Korra absolutely fills their initial concept of magical martial arts set in a futuristic world. Secondly, the setting makes the show work for me on a very, very meta level. I've always told people that to get into anime, you have to watch 3 shows: Avatar: The Last Airbender, The Legend of Korra, and Full Metal Alchemist Brotherhood, because the similarity of the vibe of each show will segue you into wanting to experience more of the medium afterwards. However, the world of Korra is well suited for this purpose. In a way, it's almost a perfect inversion of the fictional pseudo-European country of Amestris, the setting of Full Metal Alchemist, and I'd like to spend a little time here discussing the parallels between the two. Korra is set in a modernizing world, created by 2 Americans drawing heavily from Asian cultures, where modern technology like trains, airships, and radios exists alongside fantastical elements like flying bison, bending, and spirits. On the near exact contrary, Amestris is a modernizing world created by a Japanese woman drawing heavily from European cultures, where fantastical elements like homunculi, alchemy, and the portal of truth exist along modern elements like trains, firearms, and radios. These shows work so well as a sequential watch because of the influence of the people who made them. Konietzko and DiMartino drew from their love of anime so much that they looped right back around to creating one. The Legend of Korra is, as I see it, a show about the identities we label ourselves with, and how those identities interact with the rest of the world. I was an incredibly introverted kid. Growing up, I never liked to take the spotlight, or to speak out, or to be the focus of anything, really. And that's not to say I didn't take pride in the things that I did and created. I did, very much. And when people noticed me, it was this instant shot of dopamine to my system. That also isn't to say that I didn't have friends. I did, and still do, very good ones, but I found myself hard-pressed to do things with them, if that makes sense. I never went out. I preferred instead to lose myself in books and video games and shows and anime and manga, all that stereotypical nerd shit. It wasn't that I didn't want people in my life, really. It was more like I had made the idiotic choice to define myself by my isolation. And although I wasn't unhappy in that place, I knew that I could be happier. I'd always hated writing papers for school, specifically for English classes. They felt so restrictive in their guidelines and formulas that it always felt like I was more so doing a coloring book than writing out my own ideas. And that's not to say they were easy. Writing in the first half of high school was a fucking chore for me, because I seemingly just couldn't do what I was supposed to be doing. I didn't quite get yet that analysis wasn't finding the point, but finding a point, and finding evidence to back it up, so I kept throwing myself at text after text after text, trying to see the same meaning in them that my teachers all seemingly could, and failing. That all changed my junior year though, when some teacher or guidance counselor or whatever bumped me up into honors English for some reason, and my transformation into myself really began. It all started with The Great Gatsby. My teacher absolutely loved the novel, and although she had her interpretations of it, she didn't strike down other ones as long as they were properly evidenced. When I wrote a paper that was more akin to a blog post about how Gatsby and Daisy were like 2 chunks of reactive plutonium that would cause a massive explosion upon contact and hurt everything around them without providing much evidence at all, she didn't throw it out as the unsubstantiated shit she should have, and instead gave me pointers on how to run with my theory. I don't remember how that paper ended up going. Probably C at best. Doesn't matter. What does matter is that something had clicked. After that, it was like the floodgates had opened. Some catalyst had finally broken down the doors to my mind and brought upon the land a flood of words and thoughts and emotions. There was probably some really great stuff in there, but most of it just reads like a 17-year-old who thought he knew everything. I wrote constantly over that year and summer, writing on everything from Fallout 4 to Ray Bradbury to Henry David Thoreau, and I was angry, and I was happy, and I was jubilant, and I was depressed, and most of all, I was utterly elated to be feeling emotions. I had finally stopped defining myself by my isolation, and began to define myself through my writing and through my art. Life was on an upswing. The next fall, I lost one of the best teachers I had ever had. I should clarify here that he is not dead. He is still teaching, but the sheer presence he existed as in my life left a void so vast that I found myself grieving him switching jobs the same way I would grieve it if he had died. He was a mentor figure in my life, and the fact that he wouldn't be in it for what was going to be the climax of my education up to that point was completely and utterly crushing. My grief over losing him and the end of my time in high school marching band, another thing that I had defined myself by, caused more to flow out of me. My writings began to turn towards futility. I started asking myself if the future was even worth it. I was in a really bad place. I'm sorry. It culminated when I wrote an essay on a book that I didn't read for my English class, Grendel, by John Gardner. I had been bumped up again into AP Lit this year. Fancy shit. The essay I turned in was a dark piece of writing that in all honesty reads like something written by someone planning on killing themselves. It was hopeless and it was futile. It was a cry for help, and that cry was answered by the man who would become my mentor's replacement, a younger man with bright ideas who I'm incredibly fortunate to have known. In talking to him, I found myself restabilizing. I had found my hope for the future again. He's the reason I'm writing this. Really, The Last Airbender is one of his favorite shows, and one day, instead of having orchestra rehearsal, we watched Tales of Ba Sing Se and discussed the music of the episode. The tale of Iroh shook me to my core. I continued to write, with each piece slowly but surely helping me, and as graduation approached, my writings became memoiric in a way, an attempt to capture myself as I existed in that moment. I don't know if I'm a better or more grown-up person now than I was then. I certainly hope so. But reading the memoir that I wrote for my English final, God, the version that I read of myself in those pages is he's so euphoric, he's so full of life. He was so ready to experience the world. He defined himself by his experiences, and all I can do is define him by his naive excitement for what he hadn't yet experienced. Korra, too, is a character obsessed with defining herself. Her first line in the series stands starkly out to me as a beacon of sorts, from which we can extrapolate and reference her character throughout the entirety of the series.
I'm the Avatar! You gotta deal with it!
From the start of her legend, we see Korra as the polar opposite of Aang, and the embodiment of everything he had to spend 3 seasons learning to be. Where Aang was thoughtful, passive by nature, and hesitant to fight, Korra is impulsive, a fighter by nature, and built enough to justify so. Where Aang was an airbending master by the age of 12, but struggled to learn the more combat-oriented arts of bending, Korra is a bending prodigy, with an inherent grasp on 3 of the 4 elements as a small child, and by the time we come to know her in Book 1, she has mastered those 3 styles and only struggles with airbending, a martial art that emphasizes defense and avoidance of one's enemy. The fact that Korra is Aang's opposite is a vaporized horse, and I can't quite say anything that other people or the show itself hasn't already said.
I can't believe your sweet-tempered father was reincarnated into that girl. She's tough as nails.
But it is still an important piece of Korra's character. She defines herself through her status as the Avatar and the expectations that carries, both the ones placed on her by herself and by other people. And because of her reliance on that status, when Amon takes her bending away from her, she is utterly destroyed.
Go away.
I will. But I just want you to know, I'm here for you.
No, I mean go away. Back to Republic City. Get on with your life.
What are you talking about?
I'm not the Avatar anymore. You don't need to do me any favors.
Korra doesn't just define herself through her status as the Avatar, she exclusively defines herself through her status as the Avatar. To her, every event in her life is something that would not have happened had she just been a normal waterbender, and all of the people in her life, from Tenzin and Katara and the Beifongs to her closest friends, Bolin, Mako, and Asami, are only in her life because she is the Avatar. Although I have many problems with the ending of Book 1, I can praise it for the precedent it sets for Korra's character, that the biggest challenges she faces in the series aren't really the revolutionaries or the spirits or the anarchists or the fascists, but the ones generated by her own mind, and that the solution to overcoming those challenges are always within reach within her. The external conflicts she faces in the show are those spurred on by a society that wants an Avatar in it less and less with every passing year, as the Avatar is a figure that exists in direct opposition to the concept of progress. Where society in the time of Korra is one attempting to industrialize and move away from nature, she stands as the Avatar as a constant reminder of the natural world that they would at best move away from, and at worst utterly destroy by doing so. And as such, she is pushed away by society at large, both intentionally and passively. It's by deliberate choice that I say society here as well. The world needs an Avatar, despite what the people living in that world may think. The purpose of the Avatar is to maintain balance in the world, not just by stopping massive world-ending calamities, but by helping everyday people. Another thing that I enjoy about The Legend of Korra is its refusal to constantly reference its predecessor. You see this a lot in series like Star Wars. A lot of the backgrounds of shots are constantly filled with little trinkets and aliens that only exist in homage to the original trilogy. The Legend of Korra refuses to do this, however. Taking the base world from The Last Airbender, it boldly strides forward to tell its own story. That story is told in no small part by the utterly fantastic music present in the show. Jeremy Zuckerman and Benjamin Wynn, the track team from The Last Airbender, came back and gave their absolute A-game to this soundtrack. Where The Last Airbender was scored with passable synth instruments, The Legend of Korra is scored with a full orchestra and it sounds utterly glorious. Zuckerman and Wynn wrote a soundtrack that works with the themes of the show, right down to the instrumentation. Take, for instance, the Equalists, pushing for the elimination of bending, who are often scored with rhythmic percussion lines that sound like the thrum of the machines that they would rather have define the world. As another example, listen to Korra herself. As a representation of nature and traditionalism, she is often scored by an eru, a traditional Chinese string instrument that stands in sharp contrast to the more modern violins and cellos that scores characters like Asami, an industrialist who represents the modernizing world. Returning, too, is the impeccable motivic language perfected in The Last Airbender. Let me explain. So, Korra, right, main character, important, gonna have her own theme, and she does. It's this track called Fresh Air. That theme weaves in and out of the entire score, popping up in tracks like War, Greatest Change, and To Heal. And those last two are especially noteworthy because of how they build to it. The first example, Greatest Change, is already a great example of the motifs in the show, comprising nearly every prominent melody from Book 1. Starting at a dour low point, it begins with slow themes, the first of which we recognize to be Korra's theme, broken and missing pieces signifying her mood at this point in the show, after Amon has taken her bending away. Later, the piece arrives at its climax with a bombastic rendition of Aang's theme from The Last Airbender, which becomes the Avatar's theme in The Legend of Korra. This is immediately followed by Fresh Air, Korra's theme, and setting it directly after Aang's is a very deliberate choice. Within the language of the piece, having Aang's theme segue into Korra's signals to us a passing of the torch from one avatar to the next. And as Korra becomes the fully realized avatar, the music changes once again, this time to a theme called A Peaceful Place, first used during the pro-bending match where Korra's airbending training takes over and she sweeps the opposing team, having harmonized with herself. The second example is just as powerful, if maybe even more so. To Heal is first used when Korra finally cleanses herself of the metallic poison during Book 4. This isn't just a rendition of her theme, though. The piece starts with a broken rendition of it. Then builds in a sound reminiscent of the peace theme from the end of The Last Airbender, but with Korra's theme. Signaling that Aang's theme has now come to an end and that it is now Korra's time to bring peace. These two concepts, motif and instrumentation, finally meet and flourish in Service and Sacrifice, the final piece from Book 3. At this point in the show, Korra is broken and battered, in a wheelchair and unable to stand, and the piece reflects this, scoring the scene with a melancholic rendition of Korra's theme. Tenzin praises Korra's actions and bravery, and Korra smiles, but the deep bags under her eyes tell us more than words ever could. As the music swells, Jinora stands up, and with her shaved head and Air Nomad tattoos, she is the spitting image of her grandfather, Avatar Aang. To underscore this point, the music explodes in a full orchestra complete with an Eru, as Korra sits in her own pain and starts to cry. Jinora represents everything Korra has tried and failed to define herself by up until this point. She is a spiritual prodigy, a masterful bender, and a patient human being. In this moment, Korra doubts whether she is even worthy of the accolades heaped upon her. In her mind, she has done nothing but fail continuously. Even the score seems to be against her. As the ritual commences, Jinora is scored by an orchestra of modernity and an Eru of tradition at the same time, striking a balance that Korra has struggled for 3 seasons to achieve. Korra has failed in every way which she has ever tried to define herself. All through the second half of high school, I wrote and wrote and wrote, this never-ending tide of words flowing out of me. When I got to college, however, that just changed. Slowly, the words became a chore, not an escape, and as they struggled to flow, I stopped letting them. I felt like I had lost my magic, you know? Like I just couldn't do it anymore, which was really bad because the need to write hadn't gone away, but the ability to seemingly had. I had lost my therapy, and it threw me into a really, really bad place. And then the world ended. We all know why. A deadly pandemic hit the planet and has irrevocably changed all of our lives. Over the past year, I've made and lost friends and grown and changed as a person. That time span saw me watch 4 of what are now some of my favorite shows: Full Metal Alchemist 2003, Full Metal Alchemist Brotherhood, Avatar: The Last Airbender, and The Legend of Korra. These shows became my shoulders to lean on. After back-to-backing both FMAs, I felt like I had this hole in me that nothing could ever fill. At least, I did until Avatar came along, and I loved it. But then I finished Avatar, and the hole was back. I tried watching other shows and reading other manga, but nothing really filled that void. I cut myself off from the people in my life. People who I'd just been texting and calling on the daily. Good friends. I just dropped those connections. I was too embroiled in my own head. Every day just felt the same. Wake up, do school, come home, do homework, sleep. Sometimes I had work, sometimes I didn't. I slept a lot during the day too. At one point my mom asked me point blank if I was okay, and I lied to her face and slapped a smile on. I felt utterly hollow, is what I should have said. Like a jack-o'-lantern without a candle in it, just purposeless and cold, smiling out of the holes that life had cut into me. It was bleak. It was really bleak. Then Netflix got the rights to The Legend of Korra, and my life changed forever. Korra became my comfort show. When it dropped in August, I had finished it by the next week, and I spent the next several months rewatching it and talking about it and gushing about it on Twitter and reading the comics, and oh my god, it felt so good, so completing to have a show like that in my life again. Whenever I needed to, I could just jump into a better world, full of cool steampunk landscapes and spirits and peace, one where good was inherent and life made so much more fucking sense than it ever did here in the real. I roped my sister into watching it with me about 2 months ago. She'd never seen it, but she loved Avatar and we had an absolute blast. Watching it again, but with people I loved, was a great experience, and I loved it. And now, like the changing of the seasons, we arrive back at the beginning. Let me set the scene. It's Thanksgiving night of this year, and I am sitting on my bed, crying, full-on ugly crying, the kind that is so loud that your dad texts you from downstairs and politely reminds you that people in this house are trying to sleep. Thank you very much. My sister is sitting next to me, more surprised than anything else at the fact that I'm the one sobbing, I think. We are both staring at my laptop, propped open on a music stand, watching the credits roll on one of my favorite shows, The Legend of Korra. From the point where Korra and Kavira woke up in the spirit world, I found myself tearing up, hearing Korra talking about wanting to build a place where no one would ever be vulnerable. When the music swelled and she and Kavira walked back into Republic City, I started crying in earnest. I didn't actually see much of Varric and Zuli's wedding with all the tears in my eyes. The one thing I remember was seeing Tano playing a trombone. I play trombone as my primary instrument, and I remember screeching to my sister, "He's playing the fucking trombone! He's playing the fucking trombone!" And I was sobbing. And when Korra and Asami stared out into the spirit portal, and Korra said that the spirit world sounded perfect, I lost my mind. And I don't really know why, you know? It's an ending I've seen before, and one that I knew was coming from the start of the first episode, but still, it ruined me. Seeing that finale again was closure, in a sense, the catharsis of everything I'd felt over that hot and hellish summer coming to an end. I had been torturing myself, watching this show that I loved so dearly, and I couldn't keep doing it. I can't find the words to accurately convey how much I love The Legend of Korra. But I think I'm done watching it. At least for now. And that was almost the end of this script. That last section was written 2 weeks before I could bring myself to pick this project up again. 2 weeks to sit, to think, and stew in my own juices about the emotions I put into this project and about the emotions that I've held on to. 2 weeks where I forced myself to think about this show more critically than I maybe ever had before, and 2 weeks to come to some conclusions about it. For the entirety of that first week, I just couldn't listen to any of the music. And I love the music to The Legend of Korra. You've heard me talk about it. I have the fucking Book 1 soundtrack on CD because that's the only one they ever sold. Did you know that? They were planning on doing a 4-album release, one for each season of the show, and because of licensing hell, it's never gonna happen. That music means so fucking much to me, and I'm never gonna hear it outside of the one soundtrack that got out of licensing hell and the few tracks that Jeremy Zuckerman owns enough to upload onto his SoundCloud. After a week, I felt I was strong enough to listen to Korra and Asami's theme, one of my favorite pieces from the show, and I put it on my drive home from work one night, and it was hollower, somehow. This past summer, I got really, really into the work of this singer. Phoebe Bridgers, you might have heard of her as the sad, emo indie vibe, depression music to suffer to, maybe. And that's not entirely wrong, really. Most of her music conveys this feeling of just suffocating malaise. I've never had an abusive ex or an alcoholic dad or really ever even been in love, but her music makes me feel like I understand those feelings, if that makes sense. There's this one song of hers, Chinese Satellite, where she's describing the grief process after losing somebody she loved to suicide, I think, and she talks about doing something to a song that I think a lot of people do.
I wish I wrote it, but I didn't. So I learned the words. Hum along till the feeling's gone forever.
And God, have I done that before? You find these shows, these songs, these albums, these movies, these books, directors, genres, actors, fucking podcasts, whatever, right? And they seemed like they were created for the sole purpose of you hearing them and relating to them on such a deep and personal level that you make them a part of your identity for a time. We define ourselves by the art we love in the moment, at least I do, and we embrace it with such gusto that inevitably it can't last. You get bored of an album or artist or a book or a game or whatever, and I think that's honestly the worst feeling in the world. The human soul is like a bass string, constantly being tuned by the hands of time, and there is no pit of despair deeper than the one I find myself in every time I pop on a beloved record and discover that time has tuned me to a slightly different key, one where the notes and feelings that used to resonate so powerfully with me just don't anymore, and suddenly the music is washing over me instead of flowing through me. That's what I felt when I re-listened to Korra and Asami's theme for the first time since that Thanksgiving watch. It just didn't click. For a moment, I felt myself teetering on the brink again, but this time without the support of the show that I had used so many times to prop me up again. But then I thought about it. I realized that in a weird, roundabout way, I had gotten it. Series are named after the core conceit of their stories. You know, nothing is named arbitrarily. Cowboy Bebop speaks to the change that the characters will enact in their world, the wave that they will cut through it by playing freely without fear of risky things. The Promised Neverland speaks to the misinformation that the children are fed about the lives that they lead, and JoJo's Bizarre Adventure is self-explanatory. So too does this apply to the works in the Avatar universe. Aang's story is the story of the Last Airbender, who must grow into his role as the Avatar. I find it interesting, then, that Korra's story is named the way that it is. As much as I often refer to it as Avatar, the Legend of Korra, the word Avatar is not in the title, and that's for a reason. Where Aang's legend was one of a human accepting the titanic responsibilities of being a god in the world of mortals, Korra's story is the exact opposite, the story of Avatar Korra, who must learn to ground herself in the world around her and develop not as an avatar but as a person. Her legend is not her struggle to be the Avatar. Her struggle, her legend, is to simply be Korra, to discover the implications of what that means outside of her inherent role as a mythical demigod in an ode to modern world. The culmination of her character arc doesn't happen when she masters the Avatar state, but when she realizes that it's not the most powerful weapon she has. Korra gets beat down time and again, and every time she does, she manages to heal and get back up, not from being the Avatar, but from being herself, and accepting the support of the people she loves. This extends outside the world of the show she exists in, as well. As the series went on, Nickelodeon liked it less and less and less, pulling it from the air halfway through book 3, and consigning it to web streaming for the back half of that book and the entirety of book 4. Speaking to that, the network cut into book 4's budget, forcing Konietzko and DiMartino to devote one episode to a clip show recounting the events leading up to that point, rather than cut down their animation staff to save money. While Korra struggled to find her place in a world that told her time and again it didn't want her, so too did the Legend of Korra struggle to get its proper ending, both the character and the series having to fight to justify their existence. In that calamitous watershed moment, I think I understood what the show was trying to say. For all these months, I had been suffering, broken, rejecting my friends and family with this stupid determination that I could just do it all. But I absolutely couldn't, and when I needed to curl up and get away, Korra was there for me. An escape route into a better world, a place where I could hide and heal, but really only charge myself to about 75% capacity. I'm not saying that being into the show was toxic for me, per se, but it was a distractor. It was a security blanket I used time and again to stay sane, even when I absolutely could have gone to the people who loved me and leaned on them and not been so fucking aloof all the time. The state of the world had cut me off from people, but my own mind had been the thing holding me back, really. Only by facing that and reconnecting with the people in my life could I start to move forward. Only by looking at myself in the mirror and pulling my hair up out of my eyes and being honest with myself could I begin to heal. And I'm not at all saying that that moment was a click and it's better thing for me. Far, far from it, but it was a turning point. It was the point where I looked at myself and acknowledged that I needed to start relying on others as well as relying on myself, and that as much as I wanted to be an island that does big combat, the combat was simply too big to be done by me alone. It wasn't the moment where all my problems went away. It was the moment where I started realizing that I had them and actively started striving to work on them. Life's been better since I started loving people again. Recently, a few friends and I started watching The Last Airbender again, together, using Discord and Teleparty and Netflix to do what the end of the world banned us from doing, and the show is still an absolute masterpiece, but the real fun of it isn't watching one of the greatest things ever put to an animation cell. It's doing it with other people. This year was absolute hell for everybody, myself included. Time and time again, I found myself wondering if it would ever end, if I would ever get to hug my friends again or see the bottom half of people's faces. And we're not done with it yet, but life is getting better. And this past year has also been, strangely, one of the best ones that I've ever had. I started a podcast with some friends, I learned how to mod Minecraft and set up a server for my friend and I to play on, and I learned how to edit, but the thing that I'm most proud of from that year in hell is this video. The one that you're watching right now. Beyond being what I hope is a decently told story about a show that I love and a person that I took far too long to start loving, this video represents a turning point for me and marks the year I stopped suffering on my own and finally let people into my life. The year I stopped confining my thoughts to Google Docs and finally put something out into the world. I'm not a religious person, but there is one Bible quote that pings around my head a lot. It's the one from the book of Ecclesiastes about how there is a time for everything under the Lord. I don't think the Bible got a whole lot of shit right, especially the Old Testament, but that one is spot on in my book. Human lifetimes are pitifully short, 8 decades on average, and sadly, often much shorter. But for as short as our time on this planet is, there is time enough to do everything that makes the human life worth living, so long as we do not waste it. For too long, I floundered in pride and humility, scared to express myself, and it took a year where so many have died to realize that although there is a time for many things, there's never, ever time for that. This video represents the chaos I experienced in that tumultuous year, as well as a vow to myself. For as long as I live, I will never stop loving it. There is so much that I want to do and see in this life. I want to climb a mountain, I want to plant a tree, I want to gaze into the stars with a loved one, and never fear the views of others as I do so. But this video represents another vow, too, one on a scale that is simultaneously minuscule and all-encompassing in comparison. For as long as I live, and live grandly, to the fullest extent of my potential, I will never do it alone. I can't do it alone. I tried for like way too fucking long, and look where I ended up. I can't do that again, so as far and as long as I go, I will try to always do it with other people. And I know, right? Like, it's stupid. It's stupid. Ending this long-ass video with the real message was the power of friendship, but yeah, sometimes the simplest lessons are the ones that give us the most mileage for our money. And I don't really care, honestly. You can think that it sounds stupid, you can think it sounds contrite, you can think that I wasted this entire thing and I wasted your time, and I don't really care how it sounds to you. Because to me it sounds perfect. Thank you for watching. Watching. Thank you so much for watching this diatribe rant, whatever, about a cartoon from 6 years ago that a lot of people don't even like. I need to give some credit where it's due. Thank you to everybody from Twitter who read the script when I posted a link to it for feedback. Thanks to Google's anonymous system. I don't know exactly who you are, but you do, and you have my gratitude for that. I have to thank 3 people in particular. First, Blake, who was one of the first people to respond to my call and who helped me in my early drafting, and then Sarah, who watched my editing demo and gave me some super helpful feedback on that. I also need to extend all of the thanks that I can possibly give to my good friend Caroline, who took what I thought was a nearly finished script, tore it to pieces, and helped me make it so much better. Without her help, this project would have been much worse, I think. So, thanks, Caroline. I owe you, like, infinity for this. If you like what you saw here, feel free to like, subscribe, comment, whatever, send it to your friends, send it to your enemies, I don't know. I wanted to do stuff like this for a long time, and I want to continue doing them in the future. It's a really good creative outlet, and I have some good ideas, or what I think are good ideas, for future projects. I don't really have much to plug. I have a Twitter that's somewhere on screen right now. It's where I'm most active online, so when I finally get down to writing again, that's where you'll know about it. With that being said, thank you for giving me some of that precious time that I spoke so highly of. I don't really know what else to say. I'm not a YouTuber or on anything like that. I'm a 20-year-old in their bedroom with a microphone. So with that being said, I'm just going to cut it here. Have a good night. Be safe. I love you so much. And again, thank you. Thank you for watching.